Great. Ooh. Thanks, Mel. Hi, everyone. On behalf of IABC Queensland, special welcome. And in particular, welcome to our IABC members and, of course, our panelists, Chris, Sarah, and Alex. Thank you all for joining our June event on accessibility in communication. My name is Rianne. I'm a volunteer board member with the IABC Queensland chapter, and I'll be your Zoom host tonight with the help of Mel from our board. Thank you, Mel. I've had the pleasure of working with tonight's panelists to bring this event together. This topic has been an idea for quite some time, and the response has been really overwhelming. Our hope is that you're all even more inspired, equipped and confident to champion accessible and inclusive communication practices. So soon I'll hand over to Alicia, our moderator, but first I'll share a few words, including some housekeeping, and we'll have a networking activity. Before we continue, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners on the lands where we meet tonight and pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging. I'd like to extend the acknowledgement to First Nations people joining us online. I'm joining from Meanjin, Brisbane, whose traditional owners are the Yagara and Turrbal people. So on to a few housekeeping items. Sandy from Reporters Inc. is helping us with real-time captioning tonight and a transcript for the event. To turn on the live captions, you can please click the link that is in the chat that Sandy has popped in there now. We chose live captions over the auto-generated captions for a more accurate and inclusive interpretation of tonight's conversation. We're also recording this session and we'll make it available to ticket holders with the transcript. Microphones are muted to limit background noise. You are welcome to leave your video turned on or off. Please use the chat for comments or technical questions during the moderated panel discussion. When we commence the Q&A, we invite you to come off mute, raise your virtual hand, or use the chat to ask your question or make a comment. So I wanted to also mention that IABC Queensland's video partner, Wrapped, have a special offer for all ticket holders to this event. We'll share more about that after the Q&A concludes, so stay tuned for that. So Alicia will introduce our panelists shortly, but first we wanted to give you a moment to get to know each other a little better. We have an incredible communication community here in Queensland and beyond, and we want to make sure that you have opportunities to build your networks. So we're going to allocate you to virtual breakout rooms for about 5 minutes. Unfortunately, live and automated captioning does not extend to each breakout room. Perhaps Zoom should consider how this can work in future. So when you're in the rooms, please introduce yourselves, and we invite you to share your thoughts on the 2 questions that are shown on screen, which I'll read out for you. What does accessibility mean for you and related to the work that you do? And what is one thing that you're hoping to gain from tonight's session? So members of our IABC Queensland board will be in the rooms with you and jotting down a few of your responses to share when we get back together. So I'm going to allocate you to your rooms now, and we'll see you back here very soon. So we're really interested to know some of the responses, particularly to what you're hoping to gain from tonight's session. So I'd like to ask our board that were in some of the rooms to please just drop in chat on behalf of your group, just some of the responses about what your group was looking for from tonight's event. Give you all a moment to drop some in chat. or you can read, or you can say them verbally. Please come off mute and say them verbally.
I'll come
Either
off
way.
mute so it's not as awkward.
Thanks, Mel.
And then I'll hand over to Brooke too.
Felicity, oh sorry, Mel, did you say?
No, go ahead.
All right, go. Felicity and I just had a great chat about culturally and linguistically diverse audiences, and how, you know, through COVID we did our best, but you know, we thought we were doing a great job, but maybe we realized we probably weren't doing as good a job as we needed to. So yeah, and also the lived experiences through family and friends of you know, both physical and you know, and other accessibility issues. And yeah, just hoping to come away with a much better understanding of those sort of boxes that we need to tick, and how to actually really work effectively with others in our teams to support that really efficiently.
Yeah, similar. We didn't actually get to the second question because we had good discussion around the first question, to be honest, but we did touch on that and talked a bit about we've all got audiences with pretty diverse needs as well. So in one case, the audience is quite an older demographic as well. So they have different needs to probably other demographics as well. And how do you educate them on digital comms in particular? But yeah, we're in this new way of working where we deliver a lot more things online now, just by nature of the way where we are. And with that comes, I guess, a opportunity to look at how we can make sure that that's still accessible. It's for people who need it.
Definitely. And there's a couple of others in the chat. Thank you, Sally and Emma, for sharing those. So best practice in digital marketing, and then also how do we educate stakeholders on the importance of accessibility, digital communications, that will definitely be explored tonight. And thanks, Jemima. Yeah, what are we doing that aligns with best practice? Are there new ways of approaching it? So yeah, all really good thoughts, and we hope that you all had some good conversations and maybe a few more connections on your LinkedIn accounts as well. So for those that did join us late, just wanted to flag there is a link to join and follow the live captioning that Sandy from Reporters Inc. is providing for us tonight. So if you have joined late, please check the chat. We'll pop that in. Thanks, Sarah. We'll pop that in there and just click that to follow along with the live captioning from Sandy. So that concludes our networking activity and introductions. I'll now hand over to Alicia, our moderator for tonight, to introduce our panelists and kick off the discussion. Thank you, Alicia.
Thanks, Rian, and welcome everyone. It's so fantastic to see so many people joining us tonight, and also that so many people have their cameras on. Very brave, and it's great talking to a crowd of lovely faces. So thanks and welcome. It's fantastic to be running such a really important event, I'd say. And I'd now like to introduce our incredible panelists. So firstly, we have Chris Edwards. So welcome and hi, Chris.
Thank you. It's great to be here to talk about this important topic.
Sure is. Now, Chris is a passionate and experienced disability inclusion advocate. He joins us from Vision Australia, where he has worked for over 25 years and is the Manager of Government Relations and Advocacy. Chris is a handler of a seeing eye dog called Eva and is based in Melbourne, but he joins us from a holiday in North Queensland tonight. So thank you and welcome to Queensland, Chris.
Yes, it's lovely to be here.
Next, I'd like to introduce Alex Bay. Thanks for joining us tonight, Alex.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. And you are the General Manager of Tagged PDF, which provides document accessibility and consulting services across both Australia and internationally. So Alex grew up surrounded by people with lived experience and different disabilities, and has made a career out of bringing awareness to those who deserve to be heard. So Alex joins us from sunny, or not so at the moment, but normally sunny Brisbane. So welcome, Alex. And our third panelist is Sarah. Hi, Sarah. Welcome again to the panel tonight.
Thanks so much. Lovely to be here.
Fantastic. And Sarah is the founder of Intopia, a digital inclusion consultancy, where Sarah is affectionately called the walking WCAG by her team for her extensive WCAG knowledge. Sarah is joining us from Sydney and is also a founder of the Alley Bites and the Alley Camp, Australia's largest events on digital accessibility and inclusion. So welcome, Sarah. So thank you again to our panellists for contributing your time and expertise so generously to this event this evening. Just in terms of how we're going to run things tonight, we are going to spend around 30 minutes exploring a few topics covering digital and non-digital communication with our three panellists. If you would like to understand any of the areas that we're discussing tonight further, don't worry, we will be sharing as many of the resources discussed tonight as we can possibly fit into a communication following this event to you all. And our panellists have invited you to also connect and reach out if you like on LinkedIn. For those watching this recording at home, please check the video description for the links and the resources. So let's get underway. I think it's a really good place to start for us to think about audience. Now, the stats say that up to 20% of Australians identify with a disability. And we know this can actually be a lot higher. Is there such a thing as best practice that should be applied to all audiences? And what does that look like to you? I might start with Sarah.
Thanks so much, Alicia. So I think when I think about this, and I think about accessible communications, and actually this includes not just a disability lens, but just, you know, really a general lens, and picking up on some of those diversity communities that we heard about, which were discussed in the breakout rooms. The three things that come to mind when we talk about best practice are that things are understandable because we want everyone to be able to understand them, no matter what background they come from. We want information to be perceivable, which is kind of a WCAG word, but a great example of that is the live captions today. Someone may be deaf or hard of hearing, but having that information provided in a text format means that they can access that information without necessarily needing to rely on their hearing. And the third thing I think is actually more a categorization of respectfulness and making sure that we are using appropriate language and inclusive language for our audiences.
Absolutely, yeah. Alex, did you want to add on that answer, just expanding on what Sarah sort of said there around, you know, particularly in terms of digital accessibility?
Sure. So I think that one of the big things that I will generally share with users whenever they're looking to create any communication is that first and foremost, we want to make sure that what we're saying makes sense. You can provide massive print in 3 different formats that's screen reader accessible, but if what you're saying doesn't make sense, then you're not going to be able to communicate clearly with your intended audience. And I think that when we talk about, you know, a 20% of our population living with some level of disability, we also need to consider that disability is not a permanent state. So if you walk outside and you get glare and you can't see directly in front of you for a split second, then if someone shoves a paper right in your face at that time, where normally you might be able to see it, you can't see it at that time. Or the kids are screaming so you can't hear the TV. So having additional ways of accessing information, having captions, having audio description can help every one of us in any given situation. It's not just people who have a permanent disability that we're looking to cater to.
Yeah, great point. I'd actually never thought of it from that lens, but you're so right on that. Chris, do you like to sort of wade in on this topic? You're just on mute, Chris.
Sorry, I think Sarah and Alex have really highlighted that difference between accessibility and usability. We all want everything to be very usable, and so I think that it's really important to understand that there is a whole lot of people out there accessing this information as an audience, and they access it in vastly different ways. So if you're blind, you might access it via technology, or you might access it by braille, or you might access it by large print. And sometimes presenting the information can be different for different disabilities. Some disabilities probably prefer graphics and pictures, and then some other disabilities like simpler text. And so, it is a very challenging environment.
So with that in mind then, Chris, would you sort of say that trying to sort of cast your net as wide as possible in terms of accessibility is probably the way to go for best practice?
I think so. Well, it's certainly understanding who your target audience is probably the key thing, and ensuring that it works best with as broader audience as that you think are going to be that are likely to access it. So where you've got a very targeted piece of communication, that might mean one type of approach. But where you've got something that is going to general public, it's really important that lots of people are able to use that very simply. You've obviously got to go for a broad approach.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Chris, and thanks, Alex and Sarah, for getting us started in our thinking. So we're obviously tonight delivering this event online, and we considered all of the options out there for how we could provide an accessible experience. And I'd like to ask the panel about virtual events, of which we've all become very, very used to over the last couple of exciting years. And many of us coordinate and often facilitate at these events. So, to your mind, what are the top considerations for delivering an accessible virtual event? And I might start with this one. I might just throw to Alex first. And perhaps if just all of our panellists could just come off mute, just probably for the whole panel session now, I think.
No problem. So I think that, first of all, getting an idea, similar to what Chris was saying, getting an idea of who is going to be in your audience, and certainly ensuring that if you have anyone that's going to be participating in an event, that you're aware of any specific requirements that they have and ensure that you're able to cater to your direct audience. But I think that also being aware of some of the potential workarounds that especially digital technology enables us to use can be really useful for providing additional information to others. So I know, for example, that some people who attend some of my training courses, before we were able to provide fully recorded versions, would open up Microsoft Word and use the narrate option that would give them almost like a rough transcript of everything that was being said. And even though it isn't perfect, it certainly doesn't compare to live captions. But having that basic backup of being able to look at a rough transcript and being able to provide that if they didn't necessarily have access to it otherwise, is a really good thing to be aware of, that we're continuing to sort of improve technology and provide more options and opportunities for communication than we might have had, 5-10 years ago.
Yeah, sure. So people are just sort of, if it's not being provided, they're sort of trying to track down their own, it sounds like.
I think that people will often be aware of, I think people get a little bit used to things not necessarily working. So I know that we do offer transcripts. And so some users might get used to, needing to rely on something else and then finding it as a bonus when they do have, captions available, or if there is a transcript. But I think that over the last couple of years, it's gone from that idea of everybody brings their own tools and doesn't expect that the tools will be provided, to the expectation being that, you know, those tools are provided and that users don't have to bring their own answers anymore. And I think that that's a really good, I think it's really good for the onus to be on the presenters rather than on the audience member to, you know, solve their own problems.
For sure. I'd really like to also hear from Sarah on this. And Sarah, controversial, Zoom or Teams? Which one's ahead? Tell us.
So there's two answers to that. My first answer would be whatever works for the person. However, and I say that from experience, we, for instance, run usability testing with people, and sometimes, you know, someone will say, look, I actually have quite a lot of difficulty using Zoom, so I'd prefer Teams, or vice versa. However, when you're running a big event like this, you kind of have to actually choose a platform. My choice is Zoom, although I will say that I've been a little disappointed more recently with some of the ways they've probably slipped back a little bit, I think, in accessibility. They actually were really leading the way, and that was driven by a university in particular asking them to make their product accessible, and they actually came out as the leaders in video conferencing, I would say, in accessibility, and were for a long time. Other platforms have started to catch up, but I think actually, and Chris mentioned it before, where it's that difference also between accessibility and usability. And some of the people I've worked with have found that the Zoom interface is a bit easier to use than the Teams interface as well. So it might be technically compliant, i.e. it complies with different standards and things like that. But just, yeah, generally I've found that people tend to find Zoom a little bit easier, but it can be down to personal preference, and you can still have things that don't work.
Absolutely, and I suppose it's what you're used to as well, isn't it? And I suppose what you have a subscription to. So thanks, Sarah. Now, Chris, what do you think about live captioning versus auto-generated captions in platforms?
Well, certainly, you know, live captioning is more your standard, and I think it probably depends on, again, on what you're trying to achieve and who your audience is. So when you're holding a larger public event, it's really critical that you have live captioning, because it's going to deliver on what it's needed. If it was a very small, a small event with only a handful of people, and again, the person, you've asked them about their requirements and said, look, are you comfortable with the other option? And they say, yep, that's fine for me for this meeting. There's your answer. And I think that, certainly what Alex said is the simplest thing to do to understand to which options of all the millions of options that you've got to make your event more accessible is to simply put on your enrollment form and say, do you have any special requirements? And the people with the disability are the best to tell you what they need.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes total sense. We should definitely be going to the people, the end user, and finding out what their preferences are. But just because we love giving really practical takeaways to people that come along to IABC Queensland events, are there any other virtual platforms or apps or anything else that, just opening it to the three of you, the three panelists, that you could recommend that will help create really accessible experiences?
I think for me, it's, one is the platform, but two is, the presenters. If you're holding either an online event or a face-to-face event, for someone who's blind, they actually might want the slides in advance, because, to be able to, because the slides don't read out to them with any of the platforms in any real way. And so you've got to understand that, you know, not everyone might be able to read your fantastic looking slides. And you know, you can, the way around that is just to provide it in advance in an accessible form. You know, around, you know, I think just to go on to that Zoom topic, one of the big advantages of Zoom over Teams, apart from all the things that have been said, is that I can use a keystroke to tell me who's speaking. So when you're in a larger event on Teams, I have no idea who that voice is. And so, yeah, one option is to use the technology, but the other option is when people are speaking, you just announce who you are.
Yeah, some really, really practical and yeah, great tips there. I love the slides in advance. I mean, it's so simple and so effective for, yeah, so many reasons. So thank you, Chris. Alex and Sarah, did you just quickly want to add into those your top platforms, top apps?
I was actually going to say, in addition to having the slides before, we, for the Alley Bites and Alley Camp, we usually send out presenter tips. And one of the others that, because it's very common for presenters not to remember this, is to not read out what's on the slides. That's not what you want, but to make sure you cover as part of your presentation what you're showing on your slides. So, you know, the number of times I've seen, you know, oh, so what's this image on the screen? You know, Chris, I think you've probably been there.
Yeah. Now, as you can see from this slide,
Yes,
no, I can't.
That's right. So sometimes it's also that non-technological things to remind people, you know, make sure that you're using colors with good contrast, you know, and things like that. So that's, I'd say that's another really, really big one. The other one I'll call out, which sort of lends itself to other apps and that kind of thing, is when Chris mentioned asking people for their preferences, make sure that your sign-up forms and that are also accessible. So it's not just about getting to the event, but what about what happens before the event, the communications that are sent out, the way you sign up for the event, what happens afterwards. It's the whole entire experience that you do want to have a look at. So for instance, you know, we tend to use Humanitix for our ticketing system because we know Humanitix did quite a lot on inaccessibility. Eventbrite was lagging a little bit behind, at least the last time I checked. So, you know, we make that conscious choice, but we also always try to provide an alternate, like to contact us directly or that kind of thing, because yeah, sometimes you know, best efforts on everyone's front, you might just have something that doesn't quite work. So provide that choice, provide those different channels for people to get in touch if they do encounter an issue.
I love those, just that consideration of that whole end-to-end experience, both before the event and post. No, thank you so much, Sarah. Great points. And just quickly, Alex, before we move on to the next question.
I have basically had most of my points taken, or at least I'll piggyback off of that. But the short answer is that no matter how good technology gets, asking a person for what you need is always going to end up with giving you a better experience. So having that contact form, giving someone an option to ask for what they directly need is going to result in you providing the best experience.
Absolutely. I think like most great comms, it's always, yeah, if you put humans at the center, you normally don't go wrong. So Alex, just not to let you off the hook, but I'm going to throw to you on the next point I'd like to discuss, which is around readability and the use of language. We know that governments, particularly in the UK, the US and the EU, are increasingly mandating the use of plain language guidelines and even legislation for government communication. So tell us what's happening in Australia around this and what changes do you expect ahead for public sector communicators, of which I know we've got quite a few on with us tonight in our audience.
For sure. So the guidelines around plain language have certainly been increased in the last couple of years. And one of the big pieces that has been presented and that a lot of organizations will lean on is the Digital Transformation Agency's style guide. So the style guide will run through a lot of content around making content accessible, as well as how to ensure that our content is inclusive and that we're communicating in a way that is inclusive and that is going to be most easily understood by as many people as possible. In terms of changes that I'm expecting coming in the next little while, the biggest thing is that the more time we spend online, the more people are working from home and having non-traditional working environments and doing video conferences like this, the more people are realizing some of the limitations of what everyone had quote unquote always done, and realizing that there are so many different people out there with different requirements that maybe weren't being met by that previously. So the more focus there is, and like I mentioned earlier, the more expectation that there is around the technology and what the technology can do. I think that there has been, events like this make it so that not knowing that you can do these things isn't an excuse anymore. We can't just hide behind, oh, I didn't know that you could have live captions, or I didn't know that you could ask a person what they need to be able to do things. Like, that's not really a viable excuse anymore. And my hope is that the style guide and the hiding behind the G in WCAG being guidelines and style guide being recommendations and best practice will become a little bit more concrete in the next little while.
And can you tell us what might be happening with the target reading age?
So in terms of our target reading age, from the most recent statistics, the average reading age in Australia still sits at around that 12 to 14 year range. So anytime we're providing communication, it needs to essentially be something that you would expect someone who's 12 years old to understand. So that doesn't mean that everything that you're including has to have emojis to break up the age barrier, but it does mean that the kinds of words that you're using, the level of language that you're using, should be understood by someone who is around 12 years old. That being said, it isn't always fair to assume that your content is going to be appropriate for a 12-year-old audience. We obviously have had, within the recent pandemic, there's a lot of information that has come out that is quite technical around health jargon. And that's where things like our plain language or our easy English versions of content can become so important, because we recognize that communication about health pandemics can't necessarily be limited for everyone in an appropriate way. So providing an alternate version that really explains each of the important points through the use of a plain language or an easy English version, make sure that we're not leaving people behind, especially in these really important communications.
Yeah, great point around the easy English versions and when they might be appropriate to also develop for your communications. So thanks very much, Alex. I think that was a pretty insightful sort of description of where the Australian government is sort of heading at the moment in terms of accessibility. I'd just like to ask Chris now, just first, and I might then go to Sarah and Alex, but just around, can you think of any tangible negative and positive impacts of accessible communication, and what are some examples of those that you've experienced?
Yeah, I think that certainly, as a blind person, as someone that uses some of the assistive technology, we really do see a significant variation. I think that where I see businesses that are very strong examples are the ones that really see accessibility as a core part of their business, a part of their day-to-day function, and not as an add-on. and ones that sort of understand that they cater for all disabilities and not just, let's just choose, blind people and try and make it work for screen readers, but actually, as Alex said in the previous thing, is to say, well, what is my audience, and establish, really sound, frameworks that help provide that decision to say, okay, this piece of communication should look like this because it meets these criteria, and these bits and this other one, might look differently. I think some of the positive examples, believe it or not, are the major banks. So most of the big four major banks, really do have a significant commitment to accessibility. Yes, they're big and they do a lot of communication and don't get it always right, but they're very big on, right from the top, having that significant commitment to their communications, and have really implemented a lot of tools that actually, make my life easier. Some of the other good examples is, pockets of government. I think that some of the Department of Health, particularly in those things that Alex talked about, where they're trying to communicate, significant information to a broad audience, and realizing that you can't do that in one style. I think the South Australian government's really good at building sort of a toolbox for everybody to be able to follow. And I think a really simple example of, type of, communication or a bit of information that is done something is, we've been doing some work with the banks on credit cards, and believe it or not, just cutting a little slot in the side of a credit card can make a big difference to know what that credit card is and which way it's up. And so it's sometimes very simple things can make a big difference. On the other flip side, I think the key issues that I see is where organisations don't see it as a core part of their design, and think about accessibility very late in the piece, and that they don't ever do appropriate user testing to actually understand whether their solution works. And I think a couple of recent examples. My most recent example is today. Actually, I went to buy a gift card from one of the big gift retailer, e-gift retail sites.
Okay.
It was, I had lots of good information. The website wasn't too bad. When I went to actually check out, there was one checkbox which was about agreeing to their terms and conditions that I could not use, and therefore I couldn't actually use that provider. Similar thing when it came to government, when something as important as opting into the digital health record, I was unable to do that independently until they fixed it. And probably another example, I went and with my seeing eye dog, got some pet insurance recently, and the PDS statement, so something that's pretty important from an insurance document to understand what is covered and what isn't, it just wasn't appropriately tagged as a PDF document, and was completely, well, not completely, but very unreadable and unusable for me. And so it is. The key thing is like, think about it right from the start, and certainly, where you're building these accessible communications, it's really important to involve some testing when it's something big.
Thanks for sharing those, just those recent examples of your own lived experience, Chris. I mean, it's certainly eye-opening for me, and I'm sure it's eye-opening for a lot of people in our audience tonight. But I am really heartened to hear what you said about the big four banks. I do quite a bit of work in the financial services sector, and I was aware of their sort of commitment to accessibility. So I think that's fantastic that some of the largest institutions in the country are really leading the way on this, because surely that encourages others to follow. So, but it sounds like we've certainly got more work to do. Sarah and Alex, would one of you like to add a little bit of comment in terms of negative and positive impacts or examples of accessible communication?
I'll go.
Oh, sorry, go on, Alex.
I always joke in terms of the banks that there must have been some meeting where they realized that people with a disability have money as well. And so maybe we should probably let them use our stuff because then they'll give us their money, which just seems like it makes logical sense. Skeptically, I believe it was around the time that the NDIS came out and they realized that they had even more money. So there was even more reason to try and get their business. But at the same time, I know that personally, I have watched a Commonwealth Bank billboard be reskinned about 3 weeks ago because they released a campaign with a nice light pink background with their Commonwealth yellow text on it, talking about their new app. And when you're driving past at 60 kilometers an hour, you can't read light yellow on light pink, no matter how big the billboard is. So they spent all their money to put the billboards out without probably testing that they could see it properly. And then they went and reskinned them all and put black on the light pink so that they could read it. And Commonwealth Bank have made a big dedication towards being more accessible. And then they changed their logo to yellow on yellow. So sometimes the decisions that they make don't always line up, but they certainly are one of the better areas. But yeah, I think that from a business standpoint, even just looking at the fact that you can make a significant increase to your target audience and to your potential captive audience by communicating to more people. And if you're in an industry that isn't necessarily an early adopter, it's very easy to create a point of difference to your competition if you're being inclusive and talking to everybody and maybe some of your competition aren't. And so from a get your board to sign off on why are we doing this, increasing your market share and providing a better interaction at the same time are two pretty big boxes to tick off from a why should we do this?
Absolutely. Yeah, great link to draw there. And just Sarah, just over to you, anything to add on that?
I was actually just going to highlight a positive that came out of a negative, and that's actually Coles and their accessibility. So a number of years ago, they're one of the very few organisations where someone made a complaint that Coles Online wasn't accessible, and it got settled just before it went to court. So, but actually in Australia, it's pretty rare for complaints. They usually are settled at what's called mediation. They don't necessarily make their way to court. But at the time, you know, there was a commitment by Coles to make Coles Online more accessible, but we have been working with Coles for a number of years, including when this happened. And what I saw was this complete shift in how they viewed and approached accessibility to a point where it has become part of their DNA. They started out looking at their customer-facing assets, but they're also looking at their internal-facing assets. And I think that's really important. People often forget that it's not just about the digital comms you're putting out publicly to people, but also what about the people in your organization who may have different user needs. And so I think it's just a really great positive story where it started out not great, but they really embraced it and it has become part of their DNA. And there's other things that they do around this, which builds towards that corporate social commitment as well. So there's the sort of return on investment of customers and that kind of thing, but a lot of organizations are also focused on corporate social responsibility too, and accessibility and inclusion should be part of that.
Absolutely. What a great example, that Coles example. Can you tell me, has that extended to the in-store experience as well?
Yes, they have done certain things in the in-store experience too, including for digital products as well. So we're not just talking about websites, but your self-scanning and that kind of thing.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay. Look, I think this is a great segue into, without further ado, Chris, I know we've talked about Eva, your seeing eye dog, and I'd just really love to have Eva on screen for a minute, just to say hi and meet Eva. Would you mind? Hi, Eva.
Come on, up. There you go. There she is. Yeah. So Eva's. I think. Can you see her there? She wants to lie down.
Oh, it's late for Eva. Sorry,
never
Eva.
With children or animals.
Chris, I'd love to hear a little bit about your story and your experience with having Eva, your seeing eye dog. Yeah, and I'm sure the rest of the audience would as well, if you wouldn't mind sharing a little.
No problem. Thank you. The seeing eye dogs are obviously an incredibly important part of my life. To be able to live the life I choose, to be able to do all the things that I do for work and recreation and family commitments. The dog, Eva's my second dog, helps sort of provide that independence and mobility in travel. And I think it's about providing that confidence and the safety to be able to go anywhere I want. And in the government relations role, I'm in and out of airports and in all different environments all the time, and it would be very challenging to do without a reliable seeing eye dog. I think on the flip side, and I think this is sort of where it comes probably a bit relating to sort of accessibility and communications, is that it's a bit like we've got laws around where dogs can and can't go, and we've got which are very clear, which sort of say, look, the dog is allowed in buildings and taxis and restaurants and all those sorts of things. And you would think in today's age that that the awareness about disability is very much there. But what I actually see in reality is that probably 2 to 3 times a month I'm simply refused to be allowed to go into a taxi or a ride share or into a restaurant because I have the dog with me. And I think that that's probably an important sort of message for all of us, is that it's one thing to have your commitment to accessibility as an organisation, and I keep thinking about that logo example that Alex used, is that even at Vision Australia we have marketing agencies say no you have to use this, it's too boring what you're trying to do, which is actually then going to make it inaccessible because they want to use these odd colours. And the amount of pressure that we get from agencies compared to our commitment to accessibility, it can sometimes be really challenging.
Yeah, wow. Really interesting around around what you were saying with are people sort of, just to probe a little further, are people assuming that Eva's just a sort of a pet and not a support animal? Yeah,
I think that sometimes they get confused. But even when you explain that it's an assistance dog, it's against the law, that you'll actually get a big fine if you don't take it, that still decide to refuse to take it. And I think there still is. I know that Dylan Alcott is certainly advocating very hard, is that there's still a little bit more to go across the community around disability awareness. And I think that us as communicators across a whole lot of sectors, it's important that that we role model that if we actually have a better understanding.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for sharing just a little bit of your story and your lived experience with us tonight, Chris, because as you say, there's so much more learning and education to go, and hopefully everyone that's certainly in our audience tonight or that will watch this afterwards, can really try to propel that advocacy forward.
If I can just add one more thing. I mean,
sure.
I think the thing that that's probably really frustrating for me is that, I can, I've got a fantastic job. I can do snow skiing to, down a hill at 70 kilometers an hour. I can, I'm on a board of a $500 million organization. But when I get communication that I can't read, and when it's just so simple and something that should be taken for granted, it's so frustrating and so annoying personally to go, hold up, I can do all these things, but you've just given me something that I can't read, or something that I can't fill the form in because you haven't thought about it, or you haven't tested it, or you don't care.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for bringing that that experience to life for us. I think, it's very real, and it has a very real impact on the life of certainly your life, and I'm sure on the lives of many others. So, hopefully together we can try and bring about some more change on that front. And look, I'm conscious of time because we do want to open up to the audience Q&A, but look, I did just want to go a couple of questions quickly. Alex, just want to talk about best practice accessible documents. Now, again, we love practical takeaways for our IABC Queensland community. What are the top 3 practical things that this audience could do to check the accessibility of documents? I'm talking about documents, emails, or PDFs.
Great. So top 3 things to check. First of all, if you are providing anything that is visual, whether that be an image, whether it be a graph, is making sure that that image or graph is not the only way that you're providing that information. So the classic, see the graph below for blah, and then never explain what blah is, makes it really hard for someone who is not seeing that graph or not seeing that image to get the information. Then when it comes to PDFs in particular, the best practice for that document is to not make that the only version of the document that you create. So when we talk about thinking about the different ways that people are going to access information, one of the massive things to be aware of is a mobile audience. So audiences don't always sit at their computer and read out content anymore. More often than not, people are looking for small pieces of information that they can access on the go. So we want to make sure that we are doing mobile testing so that users can get access to the information that they need in the ways that they want it, not just that we want to print it out, so we're only going to create one version that works in one particular way. Which I know is funny for someone who runs a PDF tagging company to say, but the reality is that the best practice for accessible communication is to not just communicate in one way. And then probably the third one is just providing navigation links for long form content. So whether that be in the form of headings or whether it be through a linked table of contents or navigation links along the side in the form of bookmarks or other website links, and really making sure that users can get to the piece of information that they're looking for. So if you're sending a really long email where you talk about 10 different things, being able to provide some sort of anchor point so that a user can get back to item 4 that you were talking about means that they don't have to read through the whole email every time to get that one piece. So we want to try and make sure that, again, what people want from your communication, they're able to find quickly.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. I think what really just struck me during you going through your top 3 is just how many of those things just are just great comms practice. regardless, even sort of separate to accessibility, and just how many of the sort of the suggestions and things that are coming out in tonight's discussion really are just quite common sense and really quite simple in a lot of cases. So thank you. And just look, we are going to open up to the audience Q&A in a moment. But look, if I don't ask it now, it'll definitely come up in the Q&A anyhow. So let's just throw it out there. Social media. How accessible are platforms like Facebook, Insta, LinkedIn? And when communicators, when we're all doing our posts and putting things out there for the organisations that we work for, what should we keep in mind in terms of accessibility? And I'd just like to open that to the whole panel. Chris, do you like Instagram?
Well, it's probably my age and more than anything else. Than my kids are obsessed by Instagram. I'm not. But yeah, like there's a fantastic Instagram that is totally blind. That is I think they call them influencers. That obviously can use it. I use Facebook. I mean, I think that one of the really interesting things is that there are some improvements within the Facebook platform around tagging pictures, because one of the things that I think is really funny is that often my friends on Facebook will put something up and it'll be simply a picture and that's it, and I'm going, I don't know, you have no clue whether that was funny or something of meaning or whatever, because all I could know that there's a picture and then some comments below, and I try and work it out from there. All of the technologies are getting better where I can try and sort of get a picture and get it interpreted, but that's only going to give a very basic sort of interpretation of the picture. So I can say there's a couple of humans in front of something, whereas if you do it yourself, you can deliver the message about, well, what was that picture? What was important about that picture?
Sure. Yeah, definitely. And how do you feel about video? Is that the preference?
Videos, particularly, in a professional sense, if you can do audio description where you're describing some of the scenes, which isn't obvious. So if it's a talking head, that's not so important. But if you've got, some music with some powerful images, to have a version that has audio description, that's terrific. It was interesting. Belong, one of the Telstra companies, were one of the first to do an ad about their products, and they put audio description on it to make it more accessible to people like me.
Fantastic. And Sarah, I'm interested, how's your emoji game?
My emojis, I'm probably a bit like Chris. I use emojis, but not to the greatest extent, but they absolutely can be detrimental, particularly if they're used, like you use a lot of them. So okay. I've actually, I've read actually other screen reader users who talk about people that might update their name and then put a whole lot of emojis at the end of their name, where then you get their name and, smiley face and rainbow and this and that and something else, that kind of thing. And it adds visual clutter, which could actually be distracting to certain people, such as those with ADHD. It adds auditory clutter for a screen reader user. So it's sort of that whole use in moderation and use when appropriate. Don't go overboard. That really sort of, just detracts from the experience. Same with GIFs and animations, particularly looping GIFs and animations. If you've got short ones that are sort of 3 seconds, that kind of thing, that's usually okay. But those looping GIFs, and you get people using them also in presentations as well. To go back to our event, discussions, they can be also really, really distracting to some people, including myself, who just is, just finds them very, very distracting. The other call out I'll make is something simple that you can do is using camel case for your hashtags. So camel case is where you
camel case.
It's called camel case, and it's where you capitalize the first letter of each word. It helps with readability, because when we use all lowercase or just use the first letter as capitalized, it's very hard to differentiate where those where the words sort of stop and start. So putting hashtags, first of all, towards the end of your post or at the end of your post, not having as many sort of interleaved in your post, that can also be a bit distracting, or, you know, sort of, yeah, from different perspectives, but also using camel case as well will help with that readability of hashtags.
And Emma just brought that to life for us in the chat. Thanks, Emma.
I was going to do that too. So thank you, Emma, for doing that.
That is definitely my new term for the night. Thank you for bringing me into that tent. I hadn't heard of camel case before. I love it. Lastly, there's a group on Facebook that's facebook.com/groups/accessible social. What can you tell me about that, Sarah, Alex, Chris?
I don't follow it.
Accessible social.
Yeah, it's a new one for me.
Yeah, it's an IAAP recommended link. Rian might be able to fill us in a little.
Yeah, just for the audience, so IAAP is another group I'm sure the panel's really familiar with, but they have run a mini series on accessible digital content recently. I recommend everyone check it out. I'll put the link into our resources that we send out. But that Facebook group has been really useful, actually. It explores lots of different things. It can get quite technical, but for most of us who might generate content on organisation, you know, or community Facebook pages and so on, there's some really great tips in that group. So I highly recommend joining that one.
Fantastic. Thanks, Rian. And look, let's jump to Q&A. Don't be shy. Put on your video, get off mute. Let's just have a chat for the rest of the time. And let's, have you got your burning questions? Does anyone want to sort of get us started? Emma, you've come off mute. Great.
I just have a question about PDFs, because we do provide PDFs and then Word document versions of things, but I just want to know why PDFs aren't accessible. Is it just when there are images? What is it about that document type?
Okay, so first of all, I feel obliged to defend the honor of the PDF, which is that a PDF document can be accessible in certain situations. The blanket answer for the inaccessibility of PDF falls to mobile and to people not knowing what they're doing. So if you compare a PDF document to a Word document, the benefit of Word is that when you type into a Word document, even if you do it really badly, users will still be able to get the information that they want. So if you type too small in Word, I can highlight the text and make it bigger. Or if I'm a screen reader user, I can at least get to the words, even if headings and other styles haven't been used. For PDF, because it's a primarily print format, if you create it for print, then it's not going to have any of the interactive information. So you can't click on a link in a printed book, which means that a PDF for print might not have links. So you're telling people that there's links, but they can't use them. Then the issue with mobile is that PDF is designed to look the same no matter what program you open it in. So it looks the same in a reader versus opening it on a browser. And so when you take a document that is generally designed to be A4 and you put it on a mobile screen, the text doesn't reflow to the mobile screen in the same way that a web page does. So even for a fully sighted user, you've got to magnify it on the screen and scroll around the page to try and read the information instead of just scrolling up and down. So between those two limitations of people putting bad documents out and the documents that people are trying to access on mobile aren't the best for mobile for any users, let alone screen reader users. And I'm sure Chris would concur that PDF on mobile isn't the greatest experience in the world. That's generally where that blanket statement of it doesn't work in those cases, therefore it doesn't work. But if done properly, it can fill that niche where you have a print version of a document that also works with screen reader users, but you're not really going to end up with a PDF that is the best format for mobile. And as we access more mobile content, PDF will become less of a primary way of communicating.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Alex. And thanks, Emma. Great question. Would someone else like to come off mute and ask a question? Otherwise, I've got one up my sleeve.
There's one in the chat too, Alicia. Sorry.
I might just throw to Jennifer.
Sure. Hi, I'm Jennifer. I work at Queensland Fire and Emergency Services. So a lot of the information that we put out in my unit is public safety information, and often it's time critical for bushfire warnings, for example. Would love to hear the panel's tips and advice on what we can do to make warnings information more accessible. We're doing a lot of work about simplifying the language, but would be really keen to hear your advice. Panel members, thank you.
We might go to Sarah. Chris, what are your thoughts?
I think for me, what I've seen in relatively recent times is sometimes information being put up in maps to say this is where the fire is. And clearly, it's super important that the information isn't only represented in graphical terms, that it is represented in simple language as well. To do that, I think ensuring that the medium that you're using is the most accessible. So whether that's on a website, I think a website information compared to people needing to know how to use social media. We know that there's a lot of people that don't know social media. And I think the third thing I'd probably say is we know that there's a lot of people who are blind and low vision that actually don't use any technology, particularly the older group of people. And the importance of that old-fashioned, radio and other, telephone-based communication, is critical if you want to reach them.
Sure. And Sarah, did you want to add some comments to that? Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, I think actually Chris's mention of maps is quite interesting, because when you also think about alternate ways of presenting information on maps, it always comes back to what information does a user need at that point in time, and how can you quickly and easily not just get the information to them in a way that is easily understandable, which you mentioned, Jennifer, already, but also how can they know whether that information is relevant for them? Because that in a sort of critical emergency services scenario, when I have looked at maps before that around incidents or that kind of thing, usually the thing I want to know or someone wants to know is based on where I am right now, or maybe where a loved one is as well. So there's probably different scenarios, but where I am right now, what's around me and what do I need to do? So it's not just presenting that information in an accessible alternative or, that kind of thing. It's really thinking about what the user needs to know at that point in time. And I think it's the same with our communications. It's that choice of channel, which Chris mentioned, but then it's how do we make that information not just easy to understand, but also easy to say, is this relevant to me right now? And I think that's part of what we are doing and what we need to continue to look at doing, and using those different channels and being proactive with sharing that information.
Thank you so much.
Great question, Jennifer.
I think Ellen, it's a really good example of if to get it right, to have some workshops or something like that with people across with various disabilities, they will be informative to you to go, okay, this is what we're planning on doing, and is that going to work for you? What's worth changing? And I think that really important part of involving people with disability in that design process is a way how you'd solve your problem.
Absolutely, thanks, Chris. We've just got a question that's come in the chat as well, which is sort of back onto these PDFs. I don't know. I'm glad you're defending them, Alex, tonight, but they are coming under a bit of fire. Sorry, I've just lost it on my screen. The question is, would the preference be metadata in a PDF be preferred than a Word document?
Short
That's from
answer,
Kim.
not really. So if we're looking at pure document formats of Word versus PDF, the biggest benefit that you have for Word is flexibility. So being able to increase font size, or being able to change color, or change the font style, or shrink it down to meet your information. Being able to chop it up, move things onto different pages. The big benefit, especially for organizations with PDF, is that it doesn't change. I don't have to worry as much that I'm putting out a notice saying, we're giving away $100, and someone changes that to say I'm giving away $100,000 and moves on. So that security and being able to have my print version match my digital version has been one of the driving factors around PDF. But simply having the metadata in there doesn't help some of the audience that maybe don't know how to get to that metadata. Like if my problem is just that the words are all too close together and I want a bit of extra space, metadata doesn't solve that. And that's really where HTML becomes the gold standard, because we can make it look how we want.
Absolutely. Thank you. Great question too, Kim. Over to Frances, patiently waiting with her digital hand up. Hi, Frances.
Hello, thanks everybody. I've got a question about user testing. That's come up a couple of times at the moment, and you've talked about how that's what gets those really effective outcomes. What does the panel suggest? What does good user testing look like? Is that about having a reference group you go to all of the time? Is it broader market research? Are you employing these people? Are they doing it on a volunteer basis? I'd love to hear their thoughts on that.
I can start. So at least from our perspective, it's not volunteer. So a lot of organizations already do user research or usability testing, and I would say all participants should be paid, and that includes people with disability. We actually usually also look at if it was in person, and obviously these days that's a little less so. Looking at transportation, covering transportation costs and that kind of thing as well. In terms of who and what and where and that kind of thing, I think, any opportunities that you have, like any areas that you want to know more, like Chris mentioned about the maps, doing research with people to say, what is it that you need in an emergency situation? How are you currently getting your information? How would you like to get your information? What are your pain points? That can be some of your early stage discovery research, or it could be more, how is this product working for you? So more traditional usability testing, where you, sort of take people through and say, can you complete this task, and see how they go with that task. I think, even like I help a lot of organizations start off in this, and although it might not be representative, a really good strategy that organizations that I work with have used is to say, use that 20%. 1 in 5 people have identified of having a disability. So let's start by, if you're already doing user research or usability testing, make sure 1 in 5 has a disability. As I said, it's not necessarily going to be representative, but it is very hard for some of those powers that be to say no to something like that. And usually what I find is once you start to do those sessions, and particularly have observers in there, people in, you know, your teams, even your executive, or make highlights reels for your executive, once they see the value, and particularly if your product's not so great and you suddenly hear someone tell a story that's like, oh my gosh, you know, I wasn't able to do this, or what have you, it's really, really powerful. And then that usually builds on itself, and you can get more traction to then say, actually, we need to bring in a few more people here, you know, to actually get, you know, more experience. Because at the end of the day, talking to one person, including that with a disability, is still just talking to one person. But we sort of take the approach that something is better than nothing when you're starting out and trying to just get that ball moving.
Yeah, I think there is a real danger to just getting that one person go, I know someone with a screen reader and I'll get them to test it. and they might say, look, it works for them, but you know, it might not work for someone who uses a different type of screen reader, or someone that uses magnification, or someone that's, you know, got another disability where it impacts on them. So I think that it is trying to understand what's, you know, what's the broadest representation you can get with user testing. I think is you know, very important.
Absolutely.
And I think highlighting what Sarah said about, you know, those learnings, is that often what happens in my experience, you know, when you do this sort of stuff, is you realize that actually our design wasn't that great, full stop. So yeah, you improve it, not just for make it more inclusive for people with disability, but actually make it better design for the broader audience that you're trying to achieve.
Yep, I'll plus one to that. Seen that many times too.
Thanks. So does that help, Francis? Hopefully that's pretty comprehensive answers there. It sounds like, yeah, really making sure that you're hearing from that diversity of voices. Look, guys had their hands up for quite a while, and just to finish, this will be our last question to the panel. Guy, go ahead.
Okay, I work in transport and main roads, and mainly in the infrastructure area, and as a trained engineer, I've been taught all my life to design ergonomically for the normal person. And I'm just wondering if that question that we led off with about what's best practice doesn't have an underpinning of that same sort of philosophical approach to design. And it was quite interesting that Chris mentioned there last, you know, when we do something, we then look back and say, hey, the design really wasn't good. And I've been challenged recently to say, you know, when we're designing things for accessibility in a physical sense, we shouldn't be designing for that average person. It's more the 80 or 90 percentile person to give accessibility and to involve design reference groups. So that's kind of a presupposition to that I'm interested from the panel how much that is a focus on what they do. And when I think that through myself, I can see that potentially where we have the greatest chance for making change is in our school systems. Has there been a focus in developing material that would go into primary schools and high schools and universities, so that this becomes, you know, it changes the philosophical approach in how we address accessibility, because that brings about change within the generation.
I think that's a really interesting comment, actually, for us to close on. I'll just take a final comment from each of the panellists, if that's okay, just starting with Chris.
Look, I think that diversity inclusion has certainly moved on in organisations' plans to say that we are getting more committed to these areas. However, I think the challenge is that at the moment it's a bit aspirational for people, and so it is about moving it from a plan into your standard business processes, so it doesn't sit in the side, and actually involving like you would with any project, the end users right in the design phase, in the implementation, the testing phase, and in the review phase where you can.
Thanks, Chris. Completely agree. Might just go to Sarah just for a couple of last comments.
Absolutely. I think you're absolutely right. I can't necessarily comment on primary or secondary school, although I do think that having more visibility, particularly of neurodiversity, and also having children, in sort of mainstream schools, I think is going to change people's perception compared to even say when I was in school. In the university sector, and in particular in the digital space, though, I know that we are really struggling to get universities, TAFEs and other sort of tertiary institutes to embrace digital accessibility. There's certainly the teaching side, as in making sure that the actual course material is accessible, but in terms of actually digital professional courses, there are very few that actually include accessibility. And when they do, it's often as a tack-on subject, where really what it needs to be is integrated into the curriculum, so that it is seen not as an added extra or anything like that. It's seen as just part of that, that design process and that development process and that. And, certainly in Australia, I don't think that we're doing very well in that. In the US, for instance, there is the initiative called Teach Access that's also trying to tackle that in the US. I don't think anyone that I really know of is, certainly at a country level, is doing it well. You might find very small pockets of institutions, but it's not enough to shift the dial at the moment.
Thanks.
Thanks, Sarah. And Alex.
So I think from a school standpoint, and it's a generational change that has been happening for generations, is that idea that insert group here are people too. There's been this shift of, the us and them mentality that is slowly breaking down, where we realize that, as a straight white male, I am not the, target audience for everything that's ever been created. So insert group here are also people. And so as that becomes more of an idea in school, you don't necessarily have the people, people with disabilities as being the extra, the extra unit that you have to work with, or making sure that things work for a particular group that you're finding. It will eventually work to a point where we want to ensure that everything is catering to everybody, and that becomes the norm rather than, making it a new change. And I think that we almost need to move to like a scientific approach for accessibility, in terms of, rather than trying to see, to focus on the people that things do work for, we almost need to say, all right, who does this not work for? And how can we make it work for those people? And if we're user testing, let's, we know that this works with a screen reader, so let's bring in a different group and almost eliminate the things that it doesn't work for, which has the impact of increasing the number of things or people that it does work for.
Thanks, Alex, and thanks for that question, Guy. That does bring us to the close of tonight's panel discussion. I would like to extend just an enormous thanks to our three panellists, Alex, Sarah and Chris. I think it's been such a powerhouse discussion tonight. I know we've all got some great tools and resources to go and, do some more investigation on following this session. We'll be sure to get those out to everyone. And look, it's just been a delight moderating this discussion tonight. So thank you very much. A big, virtual round of applause to the three of you. Thank you. We hope you'll be back with us. And please, everyone, if you can just stay on the line just for literally 5 more minutes, because I am just going to share a couple of really important messages with you just before we go tonight. The first of it being a very, very, very special offer from our fantastic IABC Queensland video partners, Wrapped, to celebrate the launch of their early access subscription package and their new DIY video editor. Our friends at Wrapped are offering everyone who's bought a ticket to tonight's event a free 30-day trial. And that means they've never offered this before. And that means you can create quality branded videos very, very quickly. So it's definitely worth giving a go. If you can, if you are interested in taking up this offer, please contact Christy at Wrapped. We'll share her email in the chat for you. Rianne, I think, is also sharing within the chat our feedback survey. This is a feedback survey like no other, in that it really will take you about 2 minutes to complete, and your feedback is so, so valuable to us because we want to know how we can make IABC Queensland events as valuable and full of practical tips as possible. So please take a moment now and just complete that survey for us if you wouldn't mind. Thank you. The last thing, because I know this has been a great session tonight, is that we have our new financial year celebration happening at the Storybridge Hotel on Thursday, the 14th of July. It's free for members. I think it's $30 for non-members. It is a fantastic event, and we only hold 2 dedicated only networking events of the year, and this is one of them. Be great to see some of you. I believe Alex is coming along to join us. So you can come and, learn more about why Alex defends the PDF a little bit more at that event. But if you can make it, that would be fantastic. And otherwise, if you're not a member already, please do consider joining IABC or IABC Queensland. It's a great community. And we welcome people from across the comms spectrum. So please think about joining us, or at least jump on our mailing list and on our LinkedIn pages. So look, that's everything from me, bar probably the most important shout out of the night, which was, as I said, I absolutely love this event, and I love the person who led the organising of it as well, and that is our board member, Rianne Bell, who's just done an absolutely fantastic job organising tonight's event. So thank you very much, Rianne. You've done a just fabulous job. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
All right, and good night, everybody. Thank you. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.